This is the eye without the disorder, and this is the second part of a video series about trauma responses. And in this part I will talk about freeze and collapse. So the freeze response very often gets mixed up with another response, which is the collapse or the shutdown state. And I myself didn't know there was a difference between these two states until very recently. And it was really important for me to learn the difference because okay, and then there's also the freeze state, and there is a lot of misinformation about the freeze state and the last response, which is the shutdown or collapse state. They usually get mixed up. So I also, when I started therapy and I learned about the freeze state, I learned that it was the same as the shutdown state. But some time ago, I figured out that these two states are different. And I just learned this from observing myself. And then I tried to find that information also on the internet, and it's there. But if you're not searching for it, you might not come across it, because most of the information, also by psychologists, actually gets these two mixed up. And I think it's really, really important to know the difference, especially if you're a therapist and a survivor, of course. So the freeze state is neither the sympathetic nor the parasympathetic, it's both together. So it's basically the sympathetic, so fight or flight, that wants to kick in, but it's being held back by the parasympathetic. It's like it's putting a brake on it. So the freeze state is about observing, watching, and about hiding and becoming invisible. And in childhood abuse, since the sympathetic options of fight and flight, they aren't really options for an infant or a baby. They cannot run away and they cannot fight. So all victims of childhood abuse, they will have experienced some freeze, even if it's not the primary trauma response. They will have experienced that in the past, and they will have to work through that in therapy. Because the thing with a freeze state is, if you get stuck in that, then you will have all of this trauma energy which sort of wants to go into fight or flight. You have that stuck in your body, and you need to get it out in a way. So I've read a lot, and I've made also my own experiences with how to get that out. And it's been really interesting to read or hear podcasts about what other people have done. So, for example, some people do a lot of sports. Running, for example, can be the great way to get out the flight response, because it's literally that. And this is also what the therapy model of somatic experiencing is about. It's all about getting out that trauma energy that's stuck in your body. So as I said, for flight, running is the obvious thing, and for fight, usually it's about doing something with your arms. So can be boxing, some type of sport where you have to really work your arms, or what I heard some people do is chopping wood. It also can be, or usually is that way, that when you start therapy, fight response will come out in a very destructive way, especially if you had to suppress the fight response a lot during your trauma. Then what is typical for people with complex trauma is that anger comes out in a very explosive way, and then it can be very destructive, like destroying things, or it can be about self-harm, or it can be about attacking other people. So I guess the thing is about finding out the way for you to get out your stuck trauma energy in a way that is safe for you and for other people. And I've been through the phase of being destructive, and that's sort of not a healing way. I think it's necessary. But then when you feel that you're in a rage and you cannot control yourself, it's also re-traumatizing because you feel that you're powerless. And that's a core element of trauma. So the idea is sort of to find a way in which you can embody the emotion and the reaction, and to sort of channel it, not to be controlled by the trauma response, and not to control it either, because that's again suppressing, but to sort of be it and channel it so that there's a sense of power and agency. And that really will make you feel like you're healing, because it's like a sense of completion. And I don't know if this would have made sense to me at the beginning of my trauma recovery. So it really is a process of getting there and experiencing that for yourself, I guess. So one thing that really helps me now, and I only discovered this recently, for the fight response is to do drumming, which is really great. I mean, also for flight, because it's your arms and your legs, and it's basically a workout for your body. And I'm a big fan of music therapy, or any sort of therapy that employs a lot of creativity, because that's usually what people who have been through childhood abuse, they had to give that up as a child. Their curiosity, their playfulness, their creativity, everything you should naturally usually explore as a child, they have to give that up because they have to survive. And any sort of rhythmic activity, as in drumming or dancing, that really helps to soothe your body, to make you feel safe. And also with drumming, as it's a lot about coordination, it helps to connect the two hemispheres of your brain. So you get out the emotion, you get out the anger, the energy, but you also have to concentrate and focus. And for victims of childhood abuse, the two hemispheres of the brains usually aren't very well connected, because that happens in childhood as part of your brain development. So if you have developmental arrest, as you will inevitably have if you've been abused in infancy, then this is something that you need to do during therapy. So those are the things that I can think of. Yoga is also really great. I'm a big fan of yoga. I've been doing it for many years, and when I learned that it can be really helpful for trauma, it immediately made sense to me, because it always made me feel really calm, and also it can give you that great feeling of agency and channeling energy, and not feeling overwhelmed, but feeling like you are in power. So there are so many different types of yoga. There can be those types that are really calming and soothing and sort of getting into the parasympathetic system. But that can be also really challenging workouts. And I always felt like I needed to do those that really got me into getting out the fight and flight energy. And now I understand why. So, yeah, if freeze state has been your chronic trauma response, then the key really is about unlocking that trapped energy and channeling it through fight and flight, because that sort of needs to happen before you can then go into rest of the parasympathetic. And as I said, there's also another trauma response, which is the shutdown or the collapse. And this is sort of the last resort of the body. So this is when your body will go limp. And this is an important distinction to the freeze state, because in the freeze state, your body will be tense, your muscles will be really tense, because the body is sort of preparing to go into fight or flight. So if you're not sure if you're experiencing freeze or collapse, this will be one important factor that you can just look at. If your body is tense, and it can be anywhere in your body, it can be your arms, your legs, your back, your jaw. If you just feel tense, then it's definitely freeze. And in the collapse state, it will be basically like fainting, and your body will be really slack. So this is the state basically of emotionally of giving up and becoming completely numb. There can be a lot of dissociation in freeze, but it's also like flight, it's connected to the fear emotion. But if you do a lot of dissociating, then you might not feel the fear in freeze. But in the collapse state, it really is being completely numb, like not feeling anything, not even a hint of fear. It's about being dead or preparing for death, because this is what happens to animals when the body thinks that they are going to die. So it's like the brain starts to emit certain hormones, painkillers, to not make you feel the pain of being killed. So this is also a state that will happen a lot to victims of childhood abuse when they've been abused in early infancy, because as I said, a baby cannot fight or flight, and the only thing they can do is to scream, which is basically the police response. It's a social thing, and if that doesn't work, there is only freeze and collapse. And especially children who have been severely neglected, both emotionally and maybe also physically, they will experience a lot of the collapse state. Because as with the example of the baby, if no one gives attention to the baby, at some point they will stop screaming, because it's exhausting, and no one can scream forever. And they will then fall into the collapse state, because if no one's taking care of the baby, the body of the baby knows that they will die. So they have to give up. So this is a form of trauma that happens before your brain has developed in any significant way. So you cannot remember this. You might figure out that this happened at some point in therapy, but before you know that you've been traumatized, before you know that you've been abused, you might get into heavy states of depression that are basically the collapse response, and you might have no idea why, because the abuse and the trauma happened at such an early point in your life that it's impossible for you to remember, but your body remembers it. So emotionally being in the collapse state really feels like there is no point to living, because everything seems hopeless. It's this really deep state of hopelessness, and not even being interested in finding a solution or cheering yourself up or whatever makes you happy in life. You don't feel anything. You don't feel any interested in that anymore. So it can be it's really scary. And if you experience that, then it can really help you to know that, it's because of trauma and that you're in the collapse state. And opposed to this, the freeze response very often is perceived as anxiety or feeling sort of hypervigilant or paranoid or having panic attacks. So it's sort of anxiety versus depression in a sort of simple generalizing way. And I think it's also really, really important that therapists know how to tell the difference between the freeze and the collapse response. Because I think a lot of therapists just think that if the client is dissociating, that they need to soothe them and calm them and, make them feel that everything's safe. But if you're in the freeze state, then that's actually not what your body needs. So I've experienced this myself. I would go into a freeze state during therapy because I've been triggered. And the therapist would try to sort of bring me back and make me feel safe. And I could feel myself getting angry because I didn't know why, but my body sort of knew that that's not what I need right now. I need to kick into action. I need to get out this energy. I need to fight because I feel threatened. So I don't want to calm down. So it's really important that a therapist understands that and knows what the client needs, because the client might not know them. They probably don't know themselves. And if neither the therapist nor the client knows, then they won't get what they need. But the body of the client knows that. So I think in any kind of therapy, it's really, really important to listen to the body of the client, because the body already knows what it needs to heal. And the crucial thing is just to get to the point to listen to that and understand it, sort of to translate it. So when you're in the collapse state, on the other hand, then the easiest thing, and also what you need, I would say, is to go into the calm, safe state of the parasympathetic, because the collapse state that's the one trauma response that is completely governed by the parasympathetic system. So when you're in that collapse state, you're already in the parasympathetic. So it might actually happen that you faint, or you might fall asleep. And what I found to be the most helpful when I experienced the collapse state is to find some source of heat in order to feel safe. So this can be something physical, like an embrace from a safe person, or something like sitting against the heating, or if you have a fireplace. Doesn't matter if it's a real fire or a fake one, it's just about getting warm. And in therapy, you might not have access to something like that, but since therapy anyway is about the relationship between the therapist and the client, it's also about that interhuman warmth. So in this case, it really makes sense for the therapist to try and reconnect with the client and to make them feel safe and soothe them. Or if the relationship is not that progressed yet, the client might prefer to go away and try to connect to themselves first. But both the freeze and the collapse response are about not being able to move. So this can be really difficult. And what I experienced both in freeze and collapse is that it also can feel impossible to speak. And this can be really traumatizing because you're not able to communicate to the counselor what's going on for you. So I guess in the beginning it's really about figuring out what you need, what your body needs, what you can do to make yourself feel safe, and how your counselor can help you with that. So in the beginning, the most important step for me was to try and find a way to mobilize enough to get up and walk away to another room where I can be alone, to get away from the perceived threat. So I think it's really important that the therapist is informed and that the client knows about these different states, and to understand what's happening to them, and then they can try and figure out what they need, and that they talk with the therapist about this so they can both know what the client needs. So these were all of the trauma responses. And as a last thought about dissociative identity, I think it's really important also to pay attention to what personality parts come up in the different trauma responses. Because I also figured out that different parts of me sort of correlated to different trauma responses. And especially if someone has a primary trauma response that they or two primary trauma responses that they sort of got stuck in through childhood trauma, it will be especially important to rediscover those parts of their personality that correlate to the trauma responses that were suppressed and that they didn't have access to. This sort of goes hand in hand, because the thing with trauma is it's sort of really about imbalance and chaos inside of you. So you can look at it from the perspective of personality parts and emotions, or from trauma responses, or from dysfunctional family roles. But all of these will sort of correlate, and you will see that a person who has been abused in childhood, they will be stuck in a very restricted way. They will have only 1 or 2 primary trauma responses that they get stuck in. They will have suppressed parts of their personality, and they will have this very small restricted role or 2 roles. So it's all about expanding and gaining access to all sides of your personality and reconnecting to all of your emotions and having access to all trauma responses. So it's really about becoming whole. And when you get there in therapy work, once you start getting there, you will also feel whole. It will give you this feeling of becoming complete. And it's about exploring yourself and understanding yourself and becoming your true self and identifying with all of your different parts and who you are when you're angry, who you are when you're scared, who you are when you're sad, when you are happy, all of the different aspects of a person. So I hope you could take away something from this little series, and see you next time.